It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story, the moments before Axel Rudakubana murdered 3 little girls at a dance class here in Southport. Today, he was jailed for a minimum of 52 years and told he may never be released. A pin drop that changed our lives forever. Families and survivors describe the attacks as like a horror movie and the killer as a coward.
He's just the most despicable young person who's committed the most vile and violent acts that are going to have an impact on the victims and their families for the rest of their lives.
Also coming up on the programme, Ireland prepares for one of its most severe storms ever. Nearly 5 million people received an emergency alert, with strong winds from Storm Éowyn expected to cause disruption across the UK. Plus, the Spanish musical about a trans drug cartel boss that swept nominations at the Oscars. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight.
Good evening. Well, today, Axel Rudakubana, the teenager who stabbed 3 girls to death at a dance class here in Southport, was handed 13 life sentences and told he would serve at least 52 years behind bars. 9-year-old Alice Da Silva Aguiar, BB King, who was just 6, and 7-year-old Elsie Stankham died in that attack. In court today, gasps and sobs could be heard as video was played showing the children trying to escape. One by one, family members and survivors spoke, accusing Rudakubana of becoming a coward, describing how grief had robbed their lives of meaning. But the 18-year-old was not there to hear those words or his sentence today. He was removed from court twice for being disruptive. Our chief North of England correspondent Greg Milam has tonight's first report, and just to warn you that it does contain some very distressing details.
This is Axel Rudakubana on July the 29th, on his way to carry out a knife attack on a class full of young girls. At the bus stop, he paces up and down while phoning for a taxi. On that 5-mile journey, he's silent until the very end. When he checks, he's at the right address.
Every day. It's just number 34A, yeah.
After he refused to pay, the taxi dash cam records him approaching the door of the dance studio, looking to find his way in. We know what happened next. Inside, 26 girls were enjoying a Taylor Swift dance event at the start of the summer holidays, an event that had sold out. The girls were at a table making friendship bracelets when, without a word, Rudakubana entered and grabbed the child nearest to him. He then moved on to a second and a third, lunging at them. Leanne Lucas, who was running the class that day, said she only realised what was happening when she felt a knife go into her back. Some people left the courtroom because the details of what happened here that day were so graphic. The court was played CCTV footage in which the screams of children can be heard. Leanne Lucas is seen trying to usher them to safety. One child tries to leave the building, but is pulled back in by Rudakubana. She was one of the injured. Deanna here, KC, said the injuries sustained by 2 of the children who died could only be described as sadistic in nature. BB King, Elsie Stankham and Alice Aguiar died in the attack. 8 other girls were injured. The court heard Rudakubana's only intention that day was to kill. After he was arrested, he told police, "It's a good thing those children are dead. I'm so glad. I'm so happy." Among the weapons at his home, police found a second knife, identical to the one used in the attack. They also found evidence of his obsession with violence. In the dock, Rudakubana began shouting that he was ill and needed to see a paramedic, with the families of the victims listening in court. When he refused to stop, the judge ordered him to be removed. We then heard from some of those whose lives have been changed by the events of that day, including one of the girls who was injured. "The beginning of my nightmare," she said, "started when I saw you. I thought you were playing a joke. I saw you in your green hoodie and face mask. The thing I remember most about you is your eyes. You looked possessed. You didn't look human." Leanne Lucas also addressed the court.
I cannot give myself compassion or accept praise, as how can I live knowing I survived when children died? The trauma of being both a victim and a witness has been horrendous. The impact this has had on me can be summed up by one word: trauma. He targeted us because we were women and girls, vulnerable and easy prey.
There was a statement from the parents of Alice.
Alice was always a very kind girl who valued equality and fairness at the core. A world of possibilities awaited her, a best friend anyone could ask for. We were so lucky and privileged to have her. Every day felt like a gift. In a matter of minutes, our worlds were shattered and turned upside down by the devastating attack on our Alice. A pin drop that changed our lives forever. We kept our hopes up every second during Alice's 14-hour fight, but once she'd lost a fight, we lost our lives. Everything stopped still, and we froze in time and space. Our life went with her. He took us too.
And from Elsie's mum.
You deliberately chose that place, fully aware that there would be no parents present, fully aware that girls were vulnerable and unable to protect themselves. We were robbed of the opportunity to protect our girls. What you did was not only cruel and pure evil, it was the act of a coward.
Rudakubana wasn't in court to hear any of that, or the judge sentence him.
The prosecution have made it clear that these proceedings were not acts of terrorism within the meaning of the terrorism legislation, because there is no evidence that Rudakubana's purpose was to advance political, religious, racial or ideological cause. I must accept that conclusion. However, in my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest. I'm now going to sentence Axel Rudakubana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already.
Police say they've never established why Rudakubana chose that venue, those girls, as his target.
He's just the most despicable young person who's committed the most vile and violent acts that are going to have an impact on the victims and their families for the rest of their lives. Words almost fail to describe him in terms of just what a despicable person he is.
The judge said it is highly unlikely Rudakubana will ever be released, but so many questions remain, and all of it has come too late for the so many lives altered and the young lives lost. Greg Milam, Sky News, Southport.
Well, the Prime Minister today described Rudakubana's crimes as one of the most harrowing moments in the country's history. Sir Keir Starmer pledging to deliver the changes victims deserve. Part of that change will be an assessment of how terrorism is defined and how our agencies can work together to stop lone attackers. Our national correspondent Tom Parminter has been assessing the missed opportunities to stop this killer.
This atrocity was planned out here, inside the family home on a quiet cul-de-sac in a village 4 miles from Southport. The police discovered a stash of weapons, a machete, a set of arrows. From here, he'd researched conflicts all over the world, beheadings, terrorism and genocide. Under his bed was this Tupperware container. Tests later showed it contained the deadly toxin ricin. There's no evidence that he used it, but he'd ordered the ingredients online and made it himself.
All of the evidence that we found in relation to him shows that he was obsessed with violence. The planning shows that he was intent that day on going out to commit mass murder. What we don't know, because we've never found it, is that the ideology. That's just not there. It was more a suggestion that he was probably more socially isolated than being radicalised by anybody.
What has been the input from his immediate family into your investigation?
So we still have a live investigation ongoing, so I'm unable to answer any questions in relation to the parents at this stage.
A lot of people watching this will wonder what that means.
We have a live investigation ongoing, and that is something that we are still looking into.
This footage shows Rudakubana in a taxi a week before the attack. He intended to head to the high school he was expelled from in 2019. The man on the street is his father. The police have blurred his image. He eventually persuades his son not to make that journey, and Rudakubana gets out of the taxi. The court was told it was likely to be an attempt to carry out a similar attack. The red flags stretch back to 2019 and a catalogue of incidents over the years. Among them, he'd been caught looking up school massacres while in class. During a call to Childline, he asked, "What do I do if I want to kill somebody?" And when the police stopped him on another occasion, he had a knife. He told the officers he wanted to stab someone. A long list of worrying behaviour meant he was on the radar of multiple authorities, including the police, mental health and children's services. He'd also been referred several times to Prevent, the counter-terrorism programme, but his case was not escalated.
It is right that questions are asked about what more needs to be done across the whole Prevent system and beyond. Many threads have to come together if we are to stop children and vulnerable people being led towards violence and extremism, including better and earlier identification of those at risk and reducing the ready access to weapons and horrific toxic online material.
There will be a full inquiry, but we already know this teenager could have been stopped, and the investigation into him and his family is not yet over. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
Well, the killer's guilty plea earlier this week meant that the prosecution didn't have to lay out the full case against him in what was expected to be a trial lasting 4 to 6 weeks, potentially. However, today we got a clear account of the killer's last movements, pieced together using CCTV and doorbell footage shown in court. Some of that released to us. Well, on Monday morning, we know that he left his home on that morning in Lancashire on foot. He was wearing a green hoodie, his face covered with a surgical mask. He headed to a bus stop, and it was there he made a call before heading back towards home. He was picked up by a taxi at 11:30. Hart Street, where the dance workshop was taking place, is around 4.5 miles away, 10 to 15 minutes in a taxi. He arrived there just before 11:45. However, he refused to pay the taxi fare, the taxi driver following him as he walked down a driveway towards Masters Vehicle Body Repairs. He then walked next door to number 34A, where the Hart space is located. The taxi's dash cam showing him look into the building before going inside. Just moments later, screams were heard. Let's bring in Greg Milam, our Chief North of England correspondent, who's here with me in Southport tonight. Greg, those images released by police today, a lot of it seen in court as well by the families of the 3 girls, the survivors in there, and the entire community. Seeing a visual representation of events leading up to the most hideous of crimes. It's been a really difficult day for them to hear and see a lot of this.
Yeah, and remember, some of the families hadn't seen or heard all of that very graphic detail until this week, because there was a potential that they would have been witnesses, so that couldn't have been shared with them until we knew there wouldn't be that trial. So they were, and I think we heard in court the reaction to that, seeing and hearing that for the first time. I think there's a lot of relief that it's over, this stage is over. The prospect of that 4-week trial has gone now, and Rudakubana has been sentenced. We've had a statement from Elsie's family, one of those girls who died, of course, with their thanks for all of those who've supported them, talking about a charity in her name, but talking about how wrong it is that, as they say, someone who grew up in our society could commit such an unspeakable act of hatred, and saying they think it's right and proper that this public inquiry will take place. That, of course, is the next stage, and a lot will be examined once again. And we've heard from the Home Secretary tonight, promising to lay out details of that public inquiry coming soon, she said, to get the answers the country deserves about how a horror was allowed to happen. And I think that will mean a lot for people here. But I think now, and certainly in the days and weeks to come, the focus is all on those families. So many families touched by what happened that day. Of course, the children who died, those children who were injured and their families, those children who were there, not injured, but saw it all, the witnesses on the street. So many people in Southport touched by that, and all of their thoughts with the families of those young girls tonight.
Yeah, it's been an extremely difficult day for everyone involved. Greg, thank you. Greg Milam, our Chief North of England correspondent, who's been following the story in Southport for us today. So much has been said about the man who carried out the attack in Southport last summer. He has now gone to prison for a very long time, 13 life sentences, serving a minimum of 52 years. The judge saying he is likely never to be released. But for those here in Southport, Gillian, they want people to focus on the 3 girls who were killed that summer, Elsie, Alice and Bibi. It's those girls, their faces and the life and light that they brought to this community that they want people to focus on from this point on. We'll leave it here from Southport tonight. Gillian, back to you.
OK, Sarah Jane, thank you. Let's turn now to what forecasters say could be one of the worst storms in recent history. The Met Office said the arrival of Storm Eowyn on Friday could bring gusts of up to 100 miles per hour and flying debris, resulting in a danger to life. A rare red weather warning for strong winds is in place, covering Northern Ireland and parts of central and southern Scotland. The rest of the UK is a combination of amber and yellow. Amongst the places expected to be worst hit are Glasgow, Edinburgh and Belfast. For the first time, a red weather warning has been issued for the whole of the Republic of Ireland. Major disruption is expected tomorrow. Police Service Northern Ireland have declared a major incident, with all schools in Northern Ireland being forced to close. Police Scotland is urging drivers not to travel, and all ScotRail services will be suspended. The storm was created because of an enormous bomb cyclone, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark explains.
Storm Eowyn marks the first time that the whole island of Ireland is under a red warning for wind since the alert system was introduced in 2011. And it is an exceptional storm, a near record-breaking low-pressure zone, whisked across the Atlantic by 250-mile-an-hour jet stream winds. Across much of the UK, gusts could reach 60 miles an hour and in excess of 80 miles an hour along exposed coasts in Northern Ireland and the west of Scotland. Well, the UK is on the receiving end of the storm. It had its origins on the other side of the Atlantic, with the cold polar vortex over North America. The freezing air that brought snowstorms to the southern US and forced Donald Trump's inauguration indoors is pushed hard against warmer air from the Caribbean, seeding Storm Eowyn. This warm air mass rising above the cold drove down air pressure. That low pressure zone has been accelerated by the jet stream, deepening the pressure drop at a speed twice the rate needed to classify Eowyn as a bomb cyclone, typically the most severe kind of storm seen in the UK and Ireland.
This storm is likely to be the most disruptive storm for Northern Ireland since at least the Boxing Day storm of 1998. So you have to go back more than 25 years to find a similar storm on a similar scale for Northern Ireland. For somewhere like Glasgow, it's the first red warning for wind since 2012.
Take a look at the winds around Eowyn, at incredible speeds up to 144 miles an hour, equivalent to a major hurricane, are predicted out at sea as it approaches Ireland. Thankfully, those winds will drop as it approaches land. With red warnings across Ireland, Eowyn is already a historic storm, and gusts in exposed areas could get close to the record of 112 miles an hour for Ireland set by Hurricane Debbie in 1961. but it looks like winds won't get close to lowland Scotland's record of 142-mile-an-hour gust back in 1989, nor will it break England's record of 122-mile-an-hour gust set by Storm Eunice in 2022. Record-breaking or not, air winds are potentially lethal, meaning school closures and travel disruption. So in those areas affected, people are being urged to stay home until the storm passes.
Well, let's speak to our correspondent, Charlotte Leeming, who's in Wetherby in West Yorkshire. And Charlotte, Awen being described as an exceptional storm and strong winds expected where you are tomorrow.
That's right, Gillian. Yeah, I mean, Wetherby residents, like millions of others, really will be glued to the Met Office, won't they? Because we're expecting that storm to come in tomorrow. This is an area known for flooding as well. They will be really steeling themselves with many other people because forecasters have described this storm as serious and potentially very dangerous. A yellow weather warning for wind right here where we are and parts of West Yorkshire. And already rail operators have expressed concern in the north of England. They've said that the routes such as the Trans-Pennine ones, which are very popular in the morning commute, they will be suspended. Also keeping an eye on those routes heading north from here, from Preston and from York, going up to Cumbria and Scotland, they will face disruption as well. But really a lot of concern for those red warning areas. As we've heard, millions earlier received those emergency phone alerts on their phones for schools and transport networks due to shut tomorrow. People being asked to stay at home. So they got those alerts, those sirens on their phones, like we saw when Storm Dara came in at the end of last year. Now, we know schools in Scotland will be closed. ScotRail has suspended services, as has Lothian buses. Edinburgh Council also said tonight, they told us that council buildings will be closed, also museums, parks and galleries, and all non-essential services will be suspended. Northern Ireland, as you touched on earlier, all schools closed there as well. Disruptions to transport, to flights, to buses, to ferries. Warnings there will be delays and last-minute cancellations. Police also asking people not to drive unless absolutely essential. And warnings to stay away from the coast where there's going to be massive waves and away from forests where the trees could be falling down. And so those are the warnings tonight. Let's hear now from the emergency planners in Ireland.
Storm Awen is set to be one of the most severe storms Ireland has seen. It is going to be damaging, dangerous and destructive weather event. Forecasted winds will bring severe conditions which will constitute a risk to life and property. Our most important message today is that everybody needs to shelter in place for the duration of all red warnings.
So really serious stuff, this storm, likely to lead to power cuts. There could be damaged buildings and flying debris. And really, you know, the warning for millions of people to please stay indoors if they can, to listen to that advice from the Met Office in particular, to be prepared and to stay safe.
Charlotte, thank you.
Good evening from Washington. I'm Yalda Hakim. Donald Trump's mission to challenge and disrupt has reached the World Economic Forum in the snow-tipped peaks of Davos. He may have addressed the world's top financiers and leaders virtually, but his message was clear. He criticised the EU and tried to tempt more companies to the US. Our business correspondent Paul Kelso was listening.
Donald Trump has always been a draw, attracting a crowd in Davos, even for a virtual appearance.
What are you expecting from Mr. Trump? Mr. Kerry?
I have no idea.
Mr. Miliband? Any expectations?
Not yet.
The president beamed in from Washington to addressing a meeting of business and political leaders he's dominated from a distance.
What are you expecting from Mr. Trump, gentlemen?
Who knows? Who knows?
You know, I'm going to pass, thank you. I worked for President Biden.
And what are you expecting?
I have no idea.
I
can't wait to hear.
His message, America first, means Europe is in his sights.
The EU treats us very, very unfairly, very badly. They have a large tax that we know about, and a VAT tax, and it's a very substantial one. They don't take essentially don't take our farm products, and they don't take our cars, yet they send cars to us by the millions.
He dangled offers of tax cuts for businesses that moved to America and offered hope, but no detail, of peace in Ukraine.
It's so important to get that done. That is an absolute killing field. Millions of soldiers are being killed. Nobody's seen anything like it since World War II. They're laying dead all over the flat field.
What do you think of the President's speech, Madame Lagarde?
Little wonder Europe's leaders, including the boss of the central bank, looked slightly stunned.
This week, Davos has effectively been a live focus group made up of the rich and powerful on Donald Trump's first week in power. Well, they have just heard an expression of total confidence in American might, and he poses a huge challenge to many of them, particularly in Europe.
The UK Trade Secretary, who's been here all week, hopes in a trade war Britain would avoid direct confrontation.
They're very concerned about the deficits in goods the US has with the EU and with China. That's not the case for the US to the UK. So if we take their argument, we can engage with that.
After a week in the Alps spent guessing what Trump's second coming might mean for the global economy, no one can leave in any doubt of the disruption to come. Paul Kelso, Sky News in Davos.
The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants today for the two leaders of the Afghan Taliban, accusing them of crimes against humanity on the basis of gender and the repression of women and girls. The court in The Hague has issued similar warrants for Israeli leaders and for the leaders of Hamas in the past. I've been speaking to the court's chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, about whether he has enough international support to hold countries to account. Have a listen. Barred from jobs and excluded from public spaces. In the 3.5 years since the Taliban swept back into power, freedoms for women in Afghanistan have been dramatically reduced. Restrictions the International Criminal Court says are not just discriminatory, but criminal, issuing arrest warrants for two of the organisation's most senior figures.
It's the systemic, we say, organised, deliberate, malicious suffocation of women, the targeting of girls and women, the denial of their rights to education, access to any public spaces, their inability to go to beauty salons, their inability to walk in the park, their inability really to have hope.
I don't think the Taliban would recognise the court and therefore would probably ignore this arrest warrant that you're seeking. Is there any mechanism, though, to enforce this?
The Taliban have been in power for a while. As a matter of international law, they have not withdrawn from the Rome Statute. They have international law obligations. The issue of enforcement is another matter.
The issue of enforcement has dogged the court. Last year, Mr. Khan accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant of crimes. The court's decision to issue warrants was criticised, some signatories even stating they would not enact the warrant as Israel is not a member of the court.
Is one really seriously arguing that the hostages in Israel have no recourse when they're being held in Palestine? Or is somebody seriously arguing that a baby in Gaza or hospitals in Gaza are undeserving of protection under the Geneva Convention?
Mr. Khan has faced personal criticism. Allegations of sexual misconduct against him surfaced last year. There are some who believe that perhaps you should be stepping down from your position because this investigation is a distraction to all of the things that you've discussed with me today and the work of the court.
Well, I called for the investigation, in fact, and I'm not able to comment further. I've given statements in relation to that.
But it's added criticism for a court that can only be effective when it's seen as legitimate. That's all from the team and I here in Washington tonight. Back to you in the studio, Gillian.
Sainsbury's has announced it will cut 3,000 jobs across the country. It's to shut down its remaining cafes and close its patisserie and pizza counters. 20% of senior management roles will also go. The supermarket said the move was a bid to save money in the face of a challenging cost environment. Its bosses had previously warned that tax measures due to come into effect in April would have a significant effect. It's the Spanish musical about a Mexican drugs cartel boss who disappears from the criminal underworld to create a new life as a woman. Emilia Perez today became the most nominated non-English language film in the history of the Oscars. But there's strong competition from the post-war epic The Brutalist and blockbuster Wicked. Here's our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer.
Are you English?
It's a film that's as unpredictable as this year's Oscars race. Expect to hear a lot about this rather mad Mexican noir musical. A new record set by the trans gangster movie Emilia Perez with its 13 Oscar nominations. The most nominated foreign language film ever, with Carla Sofia Garçon the first trans star to be nominated.
Are people born wicked?
Plenty to make a song and dance about this year, with no shortage of nominations for music, films and musicals. British actress Cynthia Erivo nominated for Wicked, which is up for 10.
You're green.
If you go with snow.
In the 5 years Timothy Chalamet spent mastering how to sound like Bob Dylan, paying off with 8 nominations for A Complete Unknown.
Perhaps you can help your husband sound less like he shined shoes for a wage.
He'll go head-to-head with Adrian Brody for The Brutalist, the story of a Jewish architect rebuilding his life in America after World War II, up for 10 awards, including nominations for Felicity Jones and Guy Pearce.
The great thing about the recognition in sort of these prizes is that more people will then get to come and see it, which, you know, independent films kind of need.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself?
That there's no obvious runaway success story like last year's Oppenheimer might scare some critics as much as some of the horror films that are in contention. Demi Moore, perhaps a front-runner after her Golden Globe win for The Substance, a gory take on unattainable beauty standards. Not to mention the reworking of Gothic tale Nosferatu.
You do visually kind of have an understanding when we're on set of what it might end up looking like. But then it is then incredible to see it on a big screen, just how beautiful every frame of this film is.
With the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles, from Academy bosses, there is a determination in the City of Dreams to showcase its beauty and resilience in the ceremony in March. From Emilia Perez to Wicked.
Something has changed within me.
Hollywood will certainly be singing. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and Financial Times Whitehall editor Lucy Fisher. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, the Southport murders on the front of the Telegraph. Its headline, "We face a lifetime of grief. He should face the same." We'll be right back.